You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast coming to you from Montecito, California. And before I begin today, remember there is a website associated with this podcast called wealthformula.com. And that's where you're going to get a lot of the various resources that you don't get just by listening to the podcast, including access to some of our groups, including the Accredited Investor Club, which you may want to consider joining. The deal flow for significantly distressed assets is heating up. And we had one recently in the Investor Club that was only for people in Investor Club. And we will continue to have some probably over the course of the next several months. So if that's of interest to you, buying things at 30-40% discount prices, that kind of thing, sign up. Why not? At least check it out. Go to wealthformula.com and join the Accredited Investor Club and get onboarded. Okay, now let's talk about today's topic. It's a little different. It's a little bit more touchy-feely, I guess you can say. And that's okay, right? Once in a while, we have to change up the pace. Going back to my childhood, my dad is now 85 years old, and he's doing just fine. He's physically slowed down a little bit, but he's very, very smart. He can't hear very well, and he won't get a hearing aid. Either that's on purpose because he doesn't want to listen to people, or I think it's something silly, like somebody told him that his hearing would get worse if he wore a hearing aid. And I told him that that's not the case, but he won't listen to me. And I'm the doctor in the family, right? So he won't listen to me, but he'll listen to like his nephew. Some dude will just tell him some weird stuff and he'll listen to him. Anyway, that being said, he is a wise man in general. Okay, I will say this, and it's not something like, that's not what I thought when I was a teenager at all. I didn't think he was wise at all growing up. I knew he was smart. He was freaky smart in terms of like academics and things like that. And he was, he's still a real estate guy. We don't have the kind of relationship that I have with my daughters where, we kind of sit down and talk every day. How was your day? All that kind of stuff. I mean, he wasn't the kind of dad who was necessarily keen to talk to me much about life at all or anything really. But when he did, I realized decades later that a lot of things he was usually right? Things that I just never, that I scoffed at, that I stuck my nose up at. But a lot of times he was actually kind of right. And sometimes you realize these things when you get older, right? So I remember one time my dad, well, not one time, but I remember that, my dad, for example, used to buy a lot of real estate when I was a kid. I come from a real estate family. And he is, even though he's an engineer, he really just quit that and started buying houses and duplexes and triplexes and apartment buildings and so on. But when I was a kid, he was really in sort of like, duplexes and stuff like that, and kind of like, not great neighborhoods. They were usually pretty ugly looking properties. So I would ask him, Dad, how do you choose these buildings? And I remember him saying, cash flow. I didn't know what he was talking about. I had no idea what he was talking about. In reality, I didn't really care that much. I thought maybe he would say it was because, he liked the roof or he liked the color or something like that, but he said cash flow. And I didn't really know what cash flow meant in that context either. And then, of course, a few years later, Robert Kiyosaki releases Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and then cash flow becomes this absolute buzzword. Everybody's cash flow. And I even jumped on the Robert Kiyosaki cash flow bandwagon myself, talking about that. And it's funny because I go back and I think, well, my dad was talking about that, like, way before I ever heard Kiyosaki talking about it. Actually, it's just kind of funny. My dad reminds me a little bit of Robert Kiyosaki. I got to meet Robert a few times and stuff like that. Robert's a real teacher. My dad's not that guy, but that's sort of like, kind of mean kind of mentality. Not that my dad's a Marine, but you'd think he was like some kind of tough guy or something. Another example. So another time I remember him ask me, when I decided to go to medical school, right? My mom was super happy because she thought, she wanted a doctor in the family. My brother was supposed to be that person. He ended up not doing it. So I told her right off the bat, I'm not going to med school. Forget that. No way. Don't even ask me. Anyway, when I came in and finally decided I was going to medical school, she was super happy. But my dad, on the other hand, he didn't get it. He was frankly confused because he said, do you want to go to medical school or do you want to make money? Because the money's in real estate, not in medicine. And at that time, I was appalled. I was totally appalled that he would dissuade his own son from becoming a doctor, a professional of the, and the highest packing order, right? Everybody wants a doctor. Every parent wants a doctor. What does he not want a doctor for? But in hindsight, I got to tell you, he was probably right. I mean, now listen, I actually value my medical education because I think it makes me who I am. But obviously, I haven't practiced medicine in about 8 years now. So in hindsight, what would I say to my kids? Frankly, I'd probably make at least a warning that, if there's a belief that medical school is going to be a path of financial prosperity in the future, I would count that out because people do fine still, but by the time my kids are physicians, I don't know. Doesn't seem like a very promising place if you want to be sort of in that healthy upper middle class range anymore to me. So, and then finally, another story I remember back in the 90s. Okay, I was in medical school at Northwestern, which is in Chicago. And during that time, I remember Alan Greenspan raising interest rates rapidly, which of course I didn't really care about. But I just remember my dad talking about it because he was swearing at Alan Greenspan out loud and how he screwed him over and stuff. Because my dad had a lot of floating debt, ended up losing a lot of money. And he told me to beware of floating debt. Now, of course, on that one, he couldn't be more right because, look at what's happened to real estate in the last 2 years. I mean, interest rates went up very, very rapid, far more rapid than they ever did, even in the late 90s period with Alan Greenspan at the helm. And it has created significant devastation across the real estate market. So all these things that it's just like little things that kind of come up once in a while in my head and remind me of what he told me back in the day. So when he says things now, I listen much more closely because I'm like, this guy's probably right about it and stuff. But looking back, I really wish he'd taught me more because there's a lot of wisdom that comes out from just the experience of life. I always say that when you think about for yourself, or, like in my situation, I've learned more from mistakes than anything else. And that's so cliche to say. Everybody says, oh, you got to go and fail fast, all that mumbo jumbo. But the reality is you do. You learn an awful lot from making mistakes, from having, issues, from losing money, from doing in personal finance. I mean, that's how you learn, right? People always want to be with a winner and somebody who's never had a problem. But, it's not such a bad idea to hang your hat, following somebody who has been through war and has come out with a few scars, okay? They kind of know that it can happen. But my point there is that you need to learn from mistakes in most cases. The best learning comes from mistakes, but they don't have to be your mistakes. Now, put that in the context of learning from your parents or, you teaching your children. You could teach them a lot of stuff. They may or may not listen to you. They may be like me, not listening to my dad or not paying much attention or taking him seriously. But there is almost sort of a fiduciary responsibility to teach our kids about what we know, at least in terms of personal finance and the experiences that we've had, what to do, what not to do. And of course, I look back in those days, it was different times. Relationships were different, not only because it was like the late 80s and early 90s, which in and of itself, relationships were different between parents and children. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? That kind of stuff. But also, the dynamic of immigrant families and and their children who see themselves as sort of different in perspective. So it's different kinds of relationships than I have with my children today. So I can't really blame him. But I will say that I think it is still the case that most parents seriously undervalue teaching their children about personal finance. I have to tell you, I'm pretty guilty of it too, frankly, because it's not as much fun as playing Foursquare. It's just not as much fun to, go out there and throw. I got my girls throwing baseballs around with me. It's kind of fun, but they do need to learn about personal finance, and it's not just about taking half of their ice cream and saying that's what taxes are, but actually sitting down and, my kids ask questions sometimes. They ask good questions like, "What is money?" My 9-year-old, she asks that a few times now, and it's hard to explain that one, but it's really incumbent on us to teach them. Nevertheless, again, it's something that I think most parents won't do because, well, they might be uncomfortable with it. It may not be fun, whatever. But we've got to do something to help them become better equipped for the future. My guest today, Alpesh Parmar, he's going to tell us about how he took this matter into his own hands and actually went and wrote a book with his daughters on the topic of personal finance. And actually, it sounds like a really interesting book. So make sure to tune in after these messages. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is Alpesh Parmar. He's an entrepreneur, author, educator, and he's been dedicated to teaching kids about money, finance, and investing. In fact, he and his daughters have co-authored the book, Growing the Money Tree for Kids, which helps children understand financial concepts through relatable stories and engaging activities. Alpesh himself also is a podcaster himself. He has a podcast called Wealth Matters, which we'll talk about as well. Welcome to the show, Alpesh.
Thank you so much, Buck, for having me. We have known each other for quite a while now.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. So what inspired writing a book with your kids?
My inspiration for writing Growing the Money Tree for Kids came from my experience as a parent. I noticed a gap in the financial education provided in schools and realized that many basic financial concepts aren't taught. So I wanted to ensure my daughters Kaya and Twisha understood money management from an early age. And it just started during that COVID shutdown.
Sure.
We were at home. Of course, I have been working from home like you do, but they were at home. And they started asking me, what do I do for a living? How
I
do
get
make
that
money?
too. Yeah.
Now that I'm all the time around, and it felt, I think they saw that I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
So that is how it all started.
Yeah. So what did you tell them? My 9-year-old asked me that the other day, and I didn't know where to start.
So I said that, I invest, and they're like, what's investment? And that's when we bought Payday, Monopoly, and started playing. And then I started teaching them real estate and stocks, and slowly. And we started writing that down, and that turned out into a book.
Wow, that's interesting. So who's the book intended for?
The book mostly is geared towards 8 to 12 years old. And the reason is that when we started talking about this, my kids were 7 and 10. Now, of course, they are 11 and 14.
Right. Got it. And do you have a favorite story from the book maybe you could share?
No, absolutely. So the favorite story was how the money was invented, what did we do before we had money, like how we were trading and bartering. So, and the story has two characters, of course, Kiara and Tessa. They were named after my daughters, Kaya and Twisha. And those two girls are sixth graders. And, in the school, the teacher, Mr. Price, by the way, the name is Mr. Price, teacher's name, starts talking about money. And then he starts explaining them how bartering and trading system worked. And that was a great introduction as well as explanation. And my kids still enjoy that part where I was teaching them about bartering and trading. And I think they believe that was the better way.
Yeah, well,
it's money printing, right?
It certainly makes more sense, right? I mean, I think it's a lot easier to understand than, well, the bank lends out $10 for every dollar it has, and that creates this complete mess, which most adults don't understand, much less children, right? So, I mean, in your opinion, obviously there's other financial and literary resources for kids. How would you say this is different from some of those other?
Sure. So the main difference I would say is that we never intended to write a book. It was my goal to teach them about money and investment. And whenever I was teaching them or explaining all this to them, I said, can you write it down in your own words, right? That was very important for them to understand. So every time they had questions, we'll go back and forth, and I'll try to dumb it down and see if they will understand. And then in turn, I asked them to write it down literally on a note and paper, not on a computer or anything, right? And then I asked them to draw graphics because they loved art. So I wanted to make sure that they are engaged. So they also drew a graphic or illustration or whatever we call. So this book is basically kid verified. Kids written by kids and kids tested, right? And this is very important. I read a lot of other books, and they were, yes, dumbed down, but a lot of time, when you look at it from kids' eyes, some they did not make sense. And I'm pretty sure even this book has a lot of those concepts, but we tried to make sure that it's easy for kids to understand. And even right now, we got our proof copy actually, and as soon as my kids read it, they're like, oh, we can't put this book down, even though they knew everything. They're like, we are so excited how this book has turned out.
Yeah. How's it changed their behavior?
Not a lot, but little bit. Yes, they. The one thing is, I think every kid is different, and we all of us are different. I tell every parent that, remember, even after reading this book, they are not going to change overnight, right? Everyone has different mentality. But one thing my younger one started thinking, she wants to be a business owner. She wants to control. So they started their own business a couple of years ago, jewelry making, and she's controlling the older one. My younger one keeps telling her what to do, and she's like, I'm the owner and you are an employee. So my older one works for my younger one.
There you go.
In her business, right? And the younger one is thinking about, investing in stocks and real estate. So I think both of them, I could see how different they are.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. You probably looked at some of the data before and after writing this about, what some of the correlations between financial literacy and outcomes with regard to adults and debt, things like that. Did you what did you find there?
So definitely, we did take a look at the data, and of course, I don't have the data handy with me right now, but it was a big difference. The children who were taught about or had financial literacy of some kind through their early education, they did better than, of course, and when we looked at the data, 72% of the adults who had bad debt, right? In our world, we call it as good debt and bad debt. 72% of adults who had bad debt, they did not have any financial literacy or financial education through their early childhood or even, in their late teens.
Right, absolutely. So how do you envision parents and educators kind of using this book?
So, first, yes, I really want every parent to buy it, even though it's intended towards 8 to 12 years old. But, Park, we have covered so much in the book, like just real estate field. We have not only we have spoken about single family to apartment, but mobile home parks, self-storage assets, senior housing, you name it, right? I tried to cover.
You covered all those in that book.
Yes, just explain those to my kids so that when I'm telling them that, I own a single family residence, they're like, okay, what is that, right?
Yeah.
Or, I just invested in a self-storage. They're like, what does that mean? So now at least they understand the concepts, right? When I, because of course I'm going to, leave a legacy for them, right?
Sure.
So yes, I want every parent to go through the book, at least with the kid, and try to explain them. Maybe someone will only pick stocks, right? And we have a game in the book as well, growing the money tree game, and it only focuses on stocks and real estate. But the educator is where I think it's very important, and I'm trying to reach out to a lot of schools and libraries that they start introducing these concepts early in the school, most probably in the from third grade to sixth, seventh grade.
Have you gotten any responses from them? Any feedback?
So from my local school, of course, because they know my kids.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so they are very receptive. So to the idea of author visits, and of course, my goal is to start with author visits at pretty much. But I can't go to every school in America. Most probably it would be local. So we'll start reaching out to other schools. And the good thing is now that the schools have moved on from COVID, they know how to use Zoom.
Yeah,
So
right.
author visits can be done virtually now. The books can be sold virtually as well because people
Yeah.
buy Kindles and ebooks and whatnot. So yes, the goal is that every school in America starts, if not my book, some other book, something else, but start teaching the kids about financial education and financial literacy.
Are there any interactive elements or anything like that in the book to sort of keep it interesting?
Yes. So at the end of, so as I said, we have a game, right? And again, we are now debating that should we even come up with a game, which is like a cash flow quadrant
Right,
game, right?
right,
Which we
right.
played with my kids as well. So we are thinking about that, but at the end of every chapter, we try to summarize and we ask them questions. What did you understand? What did you not understand? Can you talk to your parent about, how does rentals work? Have they ever rented an apartment, from someone? How did that work out? So ask your parents, so keep it interactive, and we kept some quizzes as well at the end of every chapter.
How did you explain taxes?
So that's a great point, and I know you just had Tom Will right there. So we did not get into taxes much. I did explain government bonds, right? So that gave them an idea about why government, issues bonds and how our taxes work. But I'm glad that you asked. So my next book in the series, we are going to start working on it because this became Amazon #1 bestseller. And that is where we are going to talk about taxes because it would be the right time. And it would be called Growing the Money Tree for Teens.
Yeah.
And I think that's the right time to talk about taxes.
Yeah. There's good ways to do it too. You buy them ice cream and then you just eat half of it.
Yes.
And then you say, that's what taxes are.
Yeah, I've done that when we went to a restaurant and they had pasta and I'm like, give me my share.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Right. And what have you learned, I guess, as a parent in terms of educating kids about money through this process? I mean, obviously it's, a lot of people drag their feet on doing it. I probably haven't done as good a job as I should on this. And when you do it, you probably learn some things and thought, well, gosh, that was harder than I explained or harder than I thought it would be to explain. Or what did you learn about this process?
So that's a great question, Buck. And I also failed, earlier where I never spoke with them about money, and it's been a taboo, right, to talk about money. That what we do and how we make money and all that. So it was hard to start with, right? And one thing I have learned is that these kids are smart. If you explain all of this in their own words, they will catch, right? And at first I thought this going to be hard, when we started. But when I played games with them like Payday, Monopoly, and Cash Flow Quadrant, I saw how fast they started picking up. Like in Monopoly, they just started buying houses. They're
Right.
like, oh, we got to get as many assets as possible.
Right.
Like, I did not know this when I used to play Monopoly. So, but important is start early and be consistent and use everyday moments to discuss money, such as during shopping or at home when paying bills. And the other thing is keep the conversation simple and age appropriate, right? Because you don't want to go overboard either.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. Now, how's this been playing into your podcast? Your podcast is called Wealth Matters. And what's your podcast about? I mean, obviously
So,
it's
yes.
wealth, but
Wealth formula, wealth matters, pretty similar.
Yeah, yeah.
Just that you are way ahead of me. But yeah, I started the podcast to teach my friends about real estate investments, right? Because, when we get started, then our friends ask us, how do you do this? How do you do this? How can I
Right.
invest? And when I started trying to teach them one-on-one, I saw that, most of them would not do anything.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I ran out of time myself. So I started recording what I was up to. And then I started enjoying actually meeting people like you on my podcast. Not only trying to teach my friends, but I ended up learning as well as networking and meeting, making great friends out of the podcast. But long story short, the podcast is focused on alternative investment strategies.
Sure.
So be it, of course, real estate is a big part of my portfolio, but be cryptocurrencies to private funds and, crowdfunding and whatnot, right? So the goal was to teach people about anything else other than stock market.
Yeah. Are you a big crypto guy?
I used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we
Till
might
I
have
lost-
we might have exchanged some emails on that a while back
Oh,
ago.
yes, a lot.
Yeah.
Back in 2019 or so, 2018, 2019, I had Bitcoin mining machines back in 2017.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's
and,
crazy.
Yeah, and then recently we had as well, but we sell it right before it starts going up.
Oh yeah. That's that you want to talk about a education. I mean, that's a tremendous education for adults. Cryptocurrency
Yes.
trading. I mean, if you want to like have the highs and lows of the absolute highs, the absolute lows, and then, have like a lifetime worth of those within, every 5 years,
Exactly.
then get involved with cryptocurrency. I've been multi-millionaire multiple times through
Yes.
cryptocurrency and then lost it all. If I had sold at the top at every time and came back, and I would have been like, I would have made so
sitting
much
here.
money. It's crazy. But yeah, there's a big lesson we had there as well. Well, Alpesh, it's been great talking to you. How do we get the book? Is it out yet?
Yes, so as of yesterday, May 21st, Tuesday, the paperback version is also out. The ebook was released a couple weeks ago. And as of now, the book is trending as Amazon #1 bestseller in 3 categories: kids' money and saving, children's money, and children's education.
It's called Growing the Money Tree for Kids. And where will people be able to get it?
Yes, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much every big, retailers out there. Of course, Amazon is big. And also you can go to my website to purchase as well. It's called www.moneytreebooks.com. moneytreebooks.com.
Fantastic. Thanks for being on the show, Alpesh, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Buck. It was nice chatting with you.
Be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Yes, financial education for the children. Hey, listen, before we go, I want to remind you, go to wealthformula.com and sign up for the Accredited Investor Club if you have an interest in seriously distressed assets, because that's what we're going to be dealing in here very soon. So check it out for yourself. Go to wealthformula.com and just sign up for the Accredited Investor Group and get onboarded. That's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.